there. Joining us now, Abigail Spanberger. She is a former CIA executive operative, has served there 30 years in missions, both overt and covert, has a long and storied history with the Central Intelligence Agency. She's running for Congress. She's a Democrat in the 7th District, trying to knock off Republican incumbent Dr. Dave Brat, who's running for a third term. If you're not familiar with it, the area of the 7th District in Virginia is the Central Virginia area. It is the Richmond suburbs. And this is, to me, the most hotly contested race in the country. Abigail Spanberger, I believe, probably the best candidate the Democrats have put up in the country. And this is going to be a very competitive race. And I've got it as a tie. And I think it is the most vulnerable race that Republicans have in Virginia, simply because of the candidate. I mean, she's the best candidate I've seen anywhere in the USA. That's why this race is going to be very, very tough. And she is joining us now, Abigail Spanberger. Abigail, great to have you with us.
Thank you so much, John. I appreciate the kind words. Just a point of clarification, I was a case officer, was my title with the CIA, and I left in 2014 after a decade of public service. So I just want to be clear on that.
All right.
But yeah, thanks so much for having me on.
Well, it's good to have you. I also want to thank both the Spanberger campaign and the Dave Brat campaign for agreeing to our debate. We don't have a date yet. It'll be in South Chesterfield. Once we get that from the two staffs, we'll get that set up. And Abigail, we're looking forward to that, and we appreciate the opportunity that you've given all of us in order to have a debate, and we can flesh all these issues out. Abigail, let's get right to the story of the day here, and then we can get into some questions. This situation, I guess we'll call it, over, Abigail, the releasing of your personnel file, which is kind of shocking to me, especially with the type of work that you did, being released. You claimed yesterday that you thought there was maybe illegality going on the Republican side. You blamed President Trump for perhaps authorizing its release. Yet we find out that the Paul Ryan apparatus did a legitimate FOIA, and it came to them legitimately. So how do you reconcile that statement, and how did this whole thing, Abigail, happen?
Yeah, so let me start out and just explain for your listeners what it is we're talking about. So we're talking about the National Security Questionnaire, which is commonly known as the SF-86. It's a long, comprehensive document that anyone seeking a security clearance fills out. It asks everything about your medical background, your work history, every place you've ever lived, every roommate you've ever had. It's an extensive document, and it is used as the basis of a background check. Depending upon the type of background checks, one would also then have polygraph examinations and medical examinations that might go right along with those. But it's an exhaustive document that people, military personnel, national security officers, some government contractors, that people fill out in order to be able to be to receive a security clearance that they'll need to continue doing their day-to-day job in service to this country. And I filled out an SF-86, two original SF-86s, or National Security Questionnaires, during my time in applying for federal public service. One, I received a secret clearance to work as a federal law enforcement officer. The other one, I received a top secret special compartmented security clearance. And with the SF-86, you file regular updates. And so what happened was, it came to our attention that a full unredacted version of my National Security Questionnaire, including, my full Social Security, every place I've ever lived, all of the information that one would really need to easily commit any sort of identity fraud, was made available to the press. And the thing about this form is there is no legal way that anyone could receive a full unredacted version of this form. And so whether it was done erroneously or intentionally, it is not, at this point, I certainly want to get to the bottom of this, but for me, my concern is that this was a violation of the Privacy Act of 1974. Mm-hmm. As a former federal agent and someone who believes in the rule of law, this is a terrible precedent to see because here we have the National Security Questionnaire in its full unredacted form, when typically these national security questionnaires are actually not normally filled with a traditional FOIA request. So there are just so many questions, and I have read that the U.S. Postal Service, the documentation that says that the U.S. Postal Service allegedly released it in its unredacted form. And as follow-up to that, there's been an inquiry to the Office of the Inspector General filed by the House of Representatives, or some members of the House of Representatives, to try and understand how it is that this possibly could have happened. But for me, the real concern is the ramifications that this has on our military officers, on our intelligence officers, on our law enforcement personnel, our federal prosecutors, essentially, the thousands upon thousands of Americans who've trusted the government with this really personal treasure trove of information because they believe deeply in their desire to serve, that they provide all of this personal information in exchange for the hope that the federal government will deem them trustworthy of the federal government's secrets, which, of course, is what happened with me.
So, Abigail, you're right. I mean,
and just for one point of clarification.
Go ahead.
There were a lot of statements flying around yesterday. I never personally accused President Trump of having anything to do with this. There were certainly a lot of statements being put out there, but that was not in any of the statements that I made. So just a point of clarification there.
You did say that it was obtained illegally, right? I mean, you own those words, and now we find out that it was not obtained illegally. It shouldn't have ever been released. And apparently now, according to the BuzzFeed article, we can trace this back to somebody at the United States Postal Service who was in charge of these records, and they were in charge of your record. They were housing it because of what you had applied for in the Postal Office Inspector General's office. They were housing it. They were responsible for it. They released it. But that's, somebody screwing up is bad. But you did say that this was an illegal act. And I mean,
yes,
can you
to be
walk
clear,
that back?
Somebody screwing up is somebody violating the law.
Right.
Because
okay.
this is it's a violation of the Privacy Act of 1974. It's against the law to release this form in unredacted form. So however it was obtained, I stand by my statement that there's no legal way that this document could have been obtained.
But
where the blame lies is now something that we have to further figure out, because there seems to be, the potential that it was the activity perhaps lies with the Postal Service, which is why there's now a request to the Office of Inspector General to look into this. But absolutely, there's somebody screwing up was someone violating the law in this case, and I think that's an important distinction.
I'll grant you that, but it really appears now that the Republicans didn't do anything, or the Paul Ryan PAC didn't do anything to obtain this illegally. It's certainly, based on the articles that I've just seen, they seem clean here. They just did a FOIA and they got information from the USPS, the United States Postal Service. So there was nothing nefarious done by the Republicans, it appears right now. Can you at least concede that?
No, because again, in a traditional FOIA, in a FOIA request, there would not have been a release of an SF-86, this National Security Questionnaire. So the fact that there's a series of really questionable mistakes that occurred here. With a traditional FOIA, the SF-86 would not be released. So in this case, the SF-86 was released with a FOIA, which is not what's typical, not what's done. It was also done in the full unredacted form, which again is a violation of the law. The other thing that's very curious in this situation is that this request was allegedly received within 3 weeks. So within 3 weeks of requesting a FOIA, not only did they receive information that wouldn't typically be provided with a FOIA request, but they also received an unredacted form that's not typically received with a FOIA request. And just for reference, as all campaigns do, it's common practice that you have someone do self-research on you, just to understand what it is that the other, your opponent would have on you. In December, we filed FOIA requests with the CIA and with the Postal Inspection Service to get my full files that they would offer under FOIA. We haven't received anything back. So that's December until now. We filed FOIAs and are still waiting. So I am looking forward to a full investigation, but again, there are more questions at this point for me than there are answers. So, I mean, I'm going to continue to say that there are a lot of questions, and I look forward to having them answered because this is really concerning to me for what it means to so many federal employees, so many military officers nationwide who are currently serving this country, who have their documents with the United States government and who might see them released in the manner that mine were.
So, Abigail, do you still contend, I just got to get this straight now, do you still contend that the FOIA and your file could have been obtained nefariously through Republican efforts within the government? Do you still have that contention or not?
I still don't know, John, is frankly the real answer. There are too many things that just don't make sense. This request came back in 3 weeks. It included my SF-86. And, you know, according to national security experts around the country, they've never heard of SF included in a typical FOIA request, and to add insult to injury, it was wholly unredacted. So at this point, again, there are so many questions that lead me to believe that we're going to need a fuller investigation to understand really what happened. So at this point, I am not definitively saying I think it was this person or that person, but I can't rule out what it could have been because none of it makes sense.
All right. So when the investigation is done, can I at least get you on to say this? If the investigation is done and it's proved that no Republican in government had anything to do with getting this file released, will you then be willing to concede that somebody just screwed up and that it was not a Republican effort of people inside the government finding a way to get your file out? Is that fair?
It is absolutely fair, and I will say this. Again, as a former law enforcement officer, I believe in the rule of law. It is what I worked to uphold, and the fact that there is even any sort of politicking happening related to a national security questionnaire is alarming to me, and I frankly wish I were not a part of it. And so when we have a full determination of what happened and who's at fault, I will absolutely acknowledge where there was wrongdoing or where there wasn't wrongdoing, and that politics does not play a part of that. And so, I would be happy to publicly note, who's responsible and who isn't, regardless of party or affiliation.
That's fair, Abigail. First of all, I'm sorry for what happened because that thing never should have gotten released. And you're right. I mean, it's an affront to everybody who served in a security position in the federal government because those information you give is very, very detailed, and you just don't want that out. I mean, it's like you said, Abigail, you trust the government. You trust the federal government that stuff is not going to get out. I mean, that's why you go forward with it. And in this case, your privacy was really violated, and it's a sad situation. So I'm sorry for that.
And also, the thing about it is, and I think I've said this in an interview before, is this isn't really about me. I have nothing in my background that I would want to hide or conceal. There's nothing that's concerning to me. But there are people who have filled out the National Security Questionnaire who do have complicated medical histories, complicated marital histories, all of these sorts of personal stories that they wouldn't want out there. And so, if it had to happen to anyone, I guess I'm okay that it happened to me, because in the event that it is more than a clerical error, I wouldn't want this to continue. And in the event that it is just an error, again, an error that violates the law, I want to make sure that whoever is improperly and illegally kind of fulfilling these requests, if it happened on the government side, never does it again to anyone else.
And I'm with you on that. And you did say yesterday that you blame Dave Brett and Paul Ryan for being so afraid of losing that they resort to these disgraceful and likely illegal tactics. So that really was jumping the gun, Abigail. I mean, you have no proof of that, and you've admitted that you're going to find out.
Here's the thing there is that the Congressional Leadership Fund received this document, which, again, presumably they FOIA or Request for Freedom of Information Act information for everyone. And so while they may or may not have ever received an SF-86, previously, and according to everyone, they shouldn't have. Any documents they receive would have things like Social Security numbers redacted. And so where I do take issue with their actions is the fact that they took my full, and I'll say the Congressional Leadership Fund, whoever is responsible there, whether it's directly Paul Ryan, I doubt that he was sending the emails, but the Congressional Leadership Fund sent out my full unredacted SF-86 to news reporters, across the internet in a way that wasn't secure. And this was going on for about at least a month now. So I have no idea how many news outlets they sent it to, who the reporters are who received it, who might be, intercepting their emails. There's just, again, it was an improper action that they took. And under any circumstance, even if they truly did think that they received this document in a appropriate manner, I'm disappointed that nobody had the good sense to recognize that they shouldn't be sending out a document that has my Social Security number, my place of birth, every place I've ever lived, and essentially all of the information that anyone would need to create, to steal my identity completely.
So your contention.
So I do take issue with their actions, and I do think that they speak to a level of desperation.
Well, your contention, as I understand it, is that whoever got your file from the USPS or from the federal government or that independent agency, they got the FOIA, they filed the FOIA properly, they got the file. As I understand your contending here, is that whoever got that, whatever organization got that, obviously they knew what they were doing, they filed the FOIA. When they got that, they should have known, wow, we got stuff that should not get out, and somebody should have flagged that. Instead, they just sent it out. Now, that's fair. That's fair. That's one of the things I thought about. Like, whoever got that should have been able to open it up and say, wow, we got way more than legally we should have. Somebody screwed this up and do the right thing. And apparently that's where the rub is. All right, we have 5 more minutes.
And also one other thing is that then I sent a cease and desist letter on, let's see, what day is it? Thursday. I sent a cease and desist day on Tuesday, a cease and desist letter asking them to stop circulating my Social Security number and to destroy copies of my full unredacted national security questionnaire. And in doubling down on their position, they sent out a full press release that included 2 separate documents, one which had the first 5 digits of my Social Security number visible, the last 4 redacted, and another document side by side that had the first 5 redacted and the last 4 visible. So even after a cease and desist, when I called their attention to the fact that I was concerned about my personal information getting out there, they doubled down on this and essentially made my Social Security number and date of birth information even more available to more reporters. So I'm very disappointed by the actions that they've taken, and their lack of respect for, my personal security as it pertains to my identity. And, in this day and age, identity theft is a real top concern, and how it may impact me long-term, frankly.
So if your own staff or if the Democratic Congressional Committee who was helping fund your campaign, if they got the same information on your opponent and you were made aware of it, what would you have done?
So what I would have done, and again, I speak from this from knowing what an SF-86 is, knowing what a national security questionnaire is. If I were to receive this, I would know that there's no way that I could have legally received it. And I will give someone the benefit of the doubt to recognize that they may not have known what an SF-86 was. They may not have known that this particular document is a far more protected document. But I think that someone looking at it and just recognizing it from a point of reasonable, even when we're filing petitions to get petitions, we don't ask people to give their Social Security numbers anymore because we recognize that people don't want those numbers out there when we're filing petitions to get on the ballot. So people within politics are sensitized to the fact that Social Security numbers are important and private information. What I would have done, again, because I would have had the point of reference to know that this is a very protected document, is I would have contacted the agency that sent it and made sure that they knew that there had been either an intentional or unintentional provision of this information that was not appropriate and, in fact, illegally provided.
Even better,
recognizing that someone else may not may not fully know what this form is. I would have at least expected them to raise it to the next level to say, I think we got more than we should have.
In a perfect world, whoever got this on the Republican side for the PAC that recognized that I shouldn't have gotten this, really, they should have A, redacted it, B, found out why they got it, C, called you up and said, hey, we got a real issue here, because you're right. This is just, nobody wants their privacy violated in this fashion. And so, hopefully we'll get to the bottom of it. But I really am sorry for what you've gone through with this. And that's, that's one of the tough things about running for public office is you get all kinds of things out there you have to deal with. We're with Abigail Spanberger. Abigail is the Democratic candidate for the 7th District of Virginia. She's running against incumbent Republican Dave Brat. We have this as a toss-up. So, Abigail, the economy is booming. You have to recognize this, right? We got now we find out 4.2% growth. We could be getting 4.5% growth in the next quarter. Wages are up, jobs are up, unemployment is under 4%, only 3 times in a 49-year period, 2 of those 3 under President Trump. Hispanic unemployment all-time low, Asian unemployment all-time low, African-American unemployment all-time low, consumer confidence at an all-time high, consumer spending, Walmart, biggest week they had back to school ever. People have money in their pockets, they have jobs. We have more jobs than people. Wages are going up. If you get elected to Congress, are you going to do anything to keep this economy going, or are you going to support policies that are going to get us back to Obama's 1% growth? You have to recognize this economy is phenomenal, right?
Yes, so I wholeheartedly recognize the economy is in a good place, and many of the measures of growth and economic strength that you just measured, that you just listed, I absolutely agree with you. And look, I am a proud American. I'm a proud Virginian. I never think it's appropriate to play politics with the strength of the economy. So you're not going to hear me say anything negative this way or that way, trying to politicize and poo-poo the growth that we've seen, because in fact we are in a strong place. But the point that I will raise, and where I will differ from your assessment, is that it's not the whole picture. There's a great sign with where we are with GDP growth. Numbers overall look good. But it isn't the whole picture. And when we look at wages, wages for many Americans are stagnating or declining, and the real wages, that is. So what it is that someone's buying power is, because we are seeing continued cost of housing increases, medical care increases, cost of living increases. And so while the economy is in a great place, not everybody's feeling it that way. And that's what I'm concerned about. But to answer your question, when I go to Congress, I don't want to make, I want to continue on the path of a positive economic direction, 100%. And this isn't an issue of politics, but I also want to make sure that we're having a larger conversation about how is the economy and our economic growth impacting our middle-class families.
Okay,
and making sure that when
Abigail,
we have strong economic growth, that there are people that we're not missing the fact that there are people still struggling to put food on the table, whose wages are not adapting to the growth in the economy, and whose day-to-day lives don't feel the strength of the economic growth that may be reflected in GDP numbers.
I got to have you back in a couple of weeks so we can get into some of the specific issues. We didn't have time today because of the FOIA
That
situation.
would be great. That would be great, in particular because I keep hearing my opponents say that I support Sanders' Medicare for All, which is absolutely not the case. I never have. In fact, my primary opponent dinged me on that quite a few times in paid communications. So I'd love to set the record straight on where I stand with policy in the future.
All right, I'll reach out to Justin. I'll get you back next week. But you're going on the record saying you do not support Bernie Sanders' Obamacare expansion, Medicaid for all. Is that correct?
I do not support Sanders' Medicare for All bill. That's correct.
Okay, I got to go. Abigail, what's your website?
AbigailSpanberger.com.